Now, welcome back to the report. Here in the UK, MPs have been meeting with UK Muslim NGO MEND to highlight the scale of Islamophobia across the country. The event explored ways of improving the identification of anti-Muslim hate crime by the criminal justice system and in official data. Davide Salve was at the UK's Parliament, from where he sends this report.
How do we respond when we witness Islamophobic abuses on the streets of our cities? And why have they exponentially increased in the last few months? Luckily, not everyone stays silent. Just 1 month ago, a woman abused 3 Muslim passengers on a bus in London. Fellow passengers filmed the attack, which helped to lead to a conviction. But only a few days later, another bus became the set of a second Islamophobic rant. The young father shouted racist comments at a Turkish elderly man before throwing his Zimmer frame off the bus. Footage shows the young man, who was traveling with a baby, relentlessly accusing the Turkish passenger of coming to the country for free benefits. Last week, a man tried without success to push a Muslim woman under a train at Piccadilly Circus tube station. According to statistics of the Metropolitan Police, hate crime against Muslims in London is risen by 70% in the past year. Figures for the 12 months up to July showed 816 Islamophobic crimes, compared with 478 for the previous 12 months period. Reported incidents range from cyberbullying to extreme violence. In Merton, a district in the southwest of London, the number of incidents year-on-year increased by 263%. The borough with the highest number of incidents in the year 2014-15 was Westminster, with 54 Islamophobic crimes, according to Scotland Yard's figures. After the attack in Paris last week, Scotland Yard has warned that there has been a sharp increase in religiously motivated hate crimes. Today, the advocacy group MEND has held a conference in Westminster to address the issue. Here is what we've got from the people outside.
Do you have the perception that Islamophobia has increased in the last few months?
There is no doubt that it is increasing, but we need to, create more awareness in terms of, educating people that, whatever happens. I mean, my background is from Afghanistan, so I tell my friends, my non-Muslim friends, that we have suffered more from terrorists more than anybody else, and on the daily basis. Just because you don't hear it on the BBC, CNN, and other these big channels, that doesn't mean that it's not happening. So this is an evil. Let's get together on this.
Unfortunately, it's now reached the levels where 70% increase up to 2015 in Islamophobic attacks in London alone, which is meant to be very cosmopolitan. And a lot of vulnerable people, especially people who outwardly display their Islam, like sisters, and who would tend to be on their own, travelling out and about. So it's really a big concern for me personally.
We need to work harder at making people feel welcome, but we also, in return, need people to try harder to integrate and to be part of our society. And I'm one of those people who thinks that good Muslims should come out and say, not in our name. I'm one of those people that thinks that's what they need to do.
And don't you think that this voice is loud enough then?
Not loud enough, by no means loud enough.
Well, I feel that Islam is an enormous, wide-spanning Abrahamic religion, which, like all religions, some people have chosen, very sadly, to interpret it in a negative way, but by and large it seems to be a force for good, which unites people, creates a strong sense of culture, identity, and for the overwhelming majority of Muslims around the world that I have encountered in various countries, or that I know personally, it seems to be a good thing.
Abuse, discrimination, and even the threat of violent attacks have been the new normality for many Muslims living in Britain. However, London police issued a statement saying that such acts won't be tolerated anymore. Davide Salvi, The Report.
Well, joining me to discuss all this is Bob Churchill for the International Ethical Union and Neal Lachman, who's an author on these issues. Bob, it's almost inevitable, sad but almost inevitable, isn't it, that there's going to be an increase in these attacks, as if there already is from what we hear anecdotally after the Paris bombings?
Yeah, I think that when you see incidents like this or the wider kind of immigration crisis, it raises people's fears and reactions, and certainly some of the reports that we've heard about in the last few days, the attack on the takeout shop owners in Scotland, and certainly this apparently entirely unprovoked pushing of this woman in front, into the train, who was very lucky to bounce off it and not go on the tracks. That appear, superficially at least, they appear to be immediate responses to Paris. I do think we need to be careful about the wider narrative, though. The package we just heard described a sort of exponential increase in attacks, but we're also talking about figures around a few hundreds of cases in a context where there are crimes in the tens of thousands of other incidents. We know from previous reports that sometimes, because we're focused so much as a community at the moment on Islam and on Muslims, that previous statistics have been sort of misreported as showing these exponential results, when in fact they've shown rises, but also in proportion with other incidents like anti-Semitic crime. And even in the package we just saw, it mentioned an incident where someone was clearly attacked for being a migrant, or presumed to be a migrant, for stealing benefits and so on. Had nothing apparently to do with their immediate religion. That wasn't put in terms of religion. So I want to caution slightly that while we must all condemn...
I think there were other things said in that attack on the bus which led the...
Well, the report said that they were relentlessly pushing that particular point. I think the word was relentless that you used in that package. So I just want to caution slightly that we all completely agree, of course, that any real incidents of anti-Muslim bigotry against individuals on the basis of their religion, just as if it was on the basis of their sexuality or their race or their age or so on, are obviously completely wrong. But I'd be a bit concerned about some of the notion that this narrative is pushing, specifically as well because we know from sort of ISIS social media accounts that is exactly the kind of alarmist reaction that they want to create. They spoke months in advance, reportedly. I mean, it's very difficult to know, who's really speaking for ISIS and who these accounts are really connected to. But they spoke for months in advance about how they specifically wanted to create a sort of civil war situation in France and in Europe, how they wanted to increase prejudice and intercommunal friction to try and create war. So in that context, if we're too alarmist, then we're buying into the thing that they're trying to promote. And also, we need to see it in the context of that. Like, what have we seen in response to these attacks? They want to create a civil war kind of situation of intercommunal violence. What we have actually seen reports that, of 4 or 5 incidents. They're terrible in their own right when these people are attacked for nothing more than, being presumed to be a Muslim by people who are out to hate them. But I think we do need to see it in that wider context of ISIS violence, which has seen millions of people displaced, thousands, tens of thousands of people executed under ISIS in their territories. And we've seen some incidents of sort of racist anti-Muslim bigotry in the UK that is on nothing like that scale. So I'm saying that, yeah, we all agree on the violence of it, but let's be careful about the context in which we talk about this, not to play into the hands of ISIS.
Neal, do you think there's a danger we're exaggerating the incidence of Islamophobic attacks, getting them out of proportion? Okay. I think we've lost the sound on that broadcast. Isn't the problem, though, with that point of view that, well, firstly, that of course there's no comparison with what's happened. Sorry, I think we've got Neal's sound back. Neal, let me just ask you that. Good, we can hear you. Let me just ask you that question again. Do you think there's a danger that we might be overstating the problem here, that we're not seeing it in context?
Somewhat. There is a process in, as they say, the psychopathology of hatred, right? So it starts with groups gathering, and it ends with a stage 7, which is the total destruction of the outgroup, the object of their hatred. So it could evolve into more and more worse stages. So as I have written a few years ago, I have analyzed the 6 stages out of the 7. So according to my analysis, we have already reached stage 6, which is attacking with weapons. It happens, kind of. But now the stage 7 would be destruction. Now, that is quite some way off. I don't believe we will ever get there. So we are stuck on stage 6 most likely for some time. And hopefully, as we start getting more and more understanding of the problem, and as we educate the public at large, then we may go back into a more peaceful way of living together. So instead of going from stage 6, where I believe we are already in Europe in terms of Muslim hate and Islamophobia, I hope not. I hope stage 7 will not be reached. So are we exaggerating? No, I don't think so. But we also have to put it in context. The majority of people in the West, the European people, are loving, understanding, tolerant people. It's the loud, lunatic fringe of the racist groups that are spewing their hatred, and it covers all of the population. But so we have to put in context that it's only a really small part of the population that is Islamophobic and hating Muslims.
Okay,
now
let me just come to Bob.
becomes...
Okay, thanks, Neil. Bob, that point taken. Obviously, we're not dealing with a society which has gone demented, and the majority of people hate Muslims, so it's a minority, certainly. But there was a newspaper cartoon, mainstream newspaper cartoon this week, which had figures in Muslim dress heading in towards Europe with rats running alongside of them. Now, can you imagine that being a portrayal of any other religious or ethnic group in Britain?
Let's name it. The newspaper was the Daily Mail, and they've done exactly the same thing in the past with Jews, depicting them as rats in the same way that this cartoon did. And I think that there some of that. To what extent is it anti-Muslim? To what extent is it anti-immigration? The Daily Mail has massive track record on anti-immigrant rhetoric. So certainly there are elements of the press that are about stirring up kind of fear and hatred, and the Daily Mail would be a prime example, frankly. But around Shoreditch, the last few days up the road where I work, it's a very mixed, very integrated community. And I think one of the responses that we often sort of underreport or fail to see so much, and this is entirely anecdotal, but it's what I think I've experienced in the last few days, is you see sort of people after a response like this also sometimes wanting to be particularly chatty and particularly nice with people that, so as sort of white Europeans, they're identifying with people behind the shop counter and thinking to themselves, maybe this is a Muslim, and actually going out of their way to be nice in response to something like this. And I think we need to see that side of the reaction as well. Yes, there is likely to be a rise in anti-Muslim bigotry after something like Paris. There will also be people taking to the streets and in their thousands on Facebook and Twitter, posting messages about how you cannot blame immigrants or migrants. And we've seen quite clearly all the attackers in Paris were actually born in Paris, a few in Belgium, and one that we're not quite sure about. So actually extending it to a migration issue is completely wrong. People are coming out and pointing that out and saying that. So yeah, there'll be a backlash, and we've seen some additional incidents of anti-Muslim violence and intimidation. But let's see the positive as well as that actually we do come together as a country and as Europe a bit, and the sensible people that aren't in that kind of tiny minority that you were talking about will defend our sort of humanity and how we need to live together, whilst at the same time condemning the violence and the terrorism.
Neil, do you think that social media has a role to play here? Because In some of the cases that we've been discussing here, that Bob's been referring to, there have been reactions by ordinary people on the buses and on the tubes who've stood up and defended people when they've been under attack. Is that something which social media can help kind of popularise as a response to Islamophobia?
Indeed, I believe so. Social media gives us all an outlet. Some people use it to spew their hatred, but most people try to use it as a kind of interactive medium, A, to inform themselves, and B, to ventilate their opinion. So if we go and believe that the majority of the people are have well meanings, then it gives them an instant interactive medium to either support or support some victims of hate crimes, and it also gives them a platform to ventilate their opinion if they see something right or wrong. So yes, social media has its place and it will never go away, I believe. So whether it is Twitter, whether it is Facebook, it has its own place in society now. And we usually, victims in the past would have only some ways to deal with their, problem, and now they can take to the social media themselves. They can tweet something or put on Facebook, and they have their friends and family informed instantly, as well as that it can create some kind of a support platform. It also helps with dealing with the aftermath of, hateful attacks or hate speech and so on.
Okay, Bob, do you think that there's a problem in the way that we've been discussing it so far, in the sense that you've stressed it's a minority problem, and that's true. We've stressed that there's a popular reaction to it, and that's true. But it's probably always true, even in societies which go, hideously in this direction, that probably the majority of people never agreed with it. Probably a majority of Germans never agreed with the policy towards the Jews. But once a group is in power and the mechanisms of government and the mechanisms of the press are set at work, it doesn't take a majority of people. It only takes a minority of people to push the society in a hideously unpleasant way.
I think that may be correct, but I don't. There's a difference between kind of recognising that a minority of people are doing something and feeling like you're at the top of a slippery slope where the end result is a sort of totalitarian or kind of fascist crackdown on a particular group. You mentioned sort of potential kind of systemic measures and so on. There's nothing like that, barring kind of, I know there's some concerns about particular kind of anti-extremist restrictions and so on. But I mean, in the United Kingdom, if anyone of any sort of serious repute actually sort of expressed what was, obviously anti-Muslim bigotry, a sort of racial or religious hatred. I mean, those people, politicians that say that sort of thing, belong to the most extreme parties and never win seats, or very rarely win anything like seats.
Are you more worried about France, where it might be said that
sure,
is
there's
a far more
big rise in nationalism? We see that whenever there's a sort of economic downturn across Europe, you get nationalist governments rise. And in no way am I saying that that's nothing to be concerned about. Or that we don't have to be absolutely on our guard for totalitarianism and for hatred. We must. But we also mustn't give in to the kind of language and the kind of narrative that ISIS wants to create, that jihadist terrorism in general wants to create, of separating societies and turning them against one another.
Neal, you were saying, that there's a possibility of rolling this backwards, of things improving rather than getting worse. What would have to be done for that to happen?
First of all, politicians have to take their responsibility. Instead of politicizing this kind of events for their own benefit, populist kind of talking, grandstanding, they should really make an effort to send out a message which really puts the whole issue in context. Now, the media, along with the politicians, has an even bigger job, and that is to inform the people. Because we hear that, of course, there is this whole issue, why are they doing this in the name of Islam? Well, I have my own opinion on that, and a lot of very well-known scholars of Islam have an opinion on that. It's a particular group. It goes back centuries, even in the century of the Prophet himself, which they call the Khawarij. There is a lunatic fringe. Now, they have to, the media and the politicians have to inform and lead the population at large. We will always have a racist percentage of the population. And now racists are feeling, before it were the black people, and before that it were the Italians, before them it were the Jews. There is always some kind of out-group. There is an in-group, which is the people, the community at large, and then there is an out-group, which is then the ethnic minority or an economic minority or whatever. So basically, if we understand, and of course, and I still believe that 90% is still good at heart, is very much tolerant and is welcoming
Okay, Neal,
color.
I'm gonna have to stop you there. It's a good place to stop. Neal Lachman, thanks for talking to us. Bob Churchill in the studio, thanks for coming in. But on that note, we'll have to wrap up this edition of The Report. I want to thank my guests on the programme today and thank you for taking the time to watch. You can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannelCA and using the hashtag The Report. But for now, we'll end with pictures of sporting legend Jonah Lumu. And we mentioned him earlier in the programme. He's sadly passed away at the age of 40 from a kidney disease. The sporting legend is largely credited with being the rugby world's first superstar. Till tomorrow, good night.
Nice.